Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's Enterprise Connect webinar, Getting 911 Right, How to Ensure Compliance, Minimize Risk, and Protect Employee Safety in the Hybrid Workplace. Sponsored by Bandwidth and broadcast by Informa. I'm Eric Kraft with Enterprise Connect, and I'll be your moderator today. We have just a few announcements before we begin. This webinar is designed to be interactive. The dock of widgets at the bottom of your screen will allow you to learn about today's speakers, download resources, share this webinar via social media outlets, and participate in the Q&A session that takes place at the end of our presentation. The slides will advance automatically throughout the event. You may also download a copy of the slides via the resources widget. Toward the end of our webinar, we'll ask you to complete our survey found on the right-hand side of your screen. Please take a minute to fill this out before leaving us today, as your feedback will provide us with valuable information on how we can improve future events. Lastly, if you're experiencing any technical problems, please click the Help widget found at the bottom of your screen, or type your issue into the Q&A area, and we'll be glad to offer one-on-one assistance. So now into the webinar. The presentation is Getting 911 Right, How to Ensure Compliance, Minimize Risk, and Protect Employee Safety in the Hybrid Workplace. Discussing today's topic is Erwin Lazar, President and Principal Analyst at Metrigy, and Robin Urkala, 911 Sales Engineer at Bandwidth. Erwin and Robin, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Eric. And thank you to everyone who is able to join us this afternoon or this morning or this evening, depending on where you're located. Robin and I think we'll have hopefully a very informative session. We invite you to submit your questions. And our goal here is to help you understand how to get 911 right. And what does that mean? How do you ensure compliance? How do you minimize risk? How do you make sure that at the end of the day, if there's unfortunately a call that's being made to 911, that call is routed to the right public safety answering point and an emergency call center operator? And how do you ensure that the person receiving the call has accurate and correct information to know where to send emergency services and to know the nature of the emergency? So we'll go through a number of different topics. And let me go ahead and talk through our agenda. So we'll talk about some of the regulatory environment within the United States specifically, and there are some similar regulations in other places, Canada and Europe and so on. We're not going to get into that as much here, but a lot of what we talk about is applicable regardless of where your locations may be operating from. We'll talk about how to create a compliant solution. We'll talk about a 3-step process for that. And we'll talk about your checklist for getting 911 right. What are the things that you need to make sure that you're addressing? Robin, anything to add to our agenda?
No, I'm excited to just welcome everyone and excited to jump in on this. So let's get going. No problem.
Excellent. All right. So Eric, I think we'll start with a poll.
Yes, we will. The first question we'd like to ask everybody to answer for us is, how confident are you that you're actually compliant with the MLTS regulations driven by BAUM's Act and Kerry's Law? Feel like you're all sorted, you've got a little ways to go, or you have no idea how confident and compliant you are. And we'll give everybody just a minute to answer us. While we're waiting, maybe we can decode that acronym MLTS for anybody who isn't aware of it. Erwin or Robin, you want to quickly?
I'll jump in. MLTS stands for Multi-Line Telephone System, which is just the FCC's fancy term for a voice over IP or other type of a phone system that could be multi-line. So it's just their term. They had to come up with some term to apply these regulations to that they didn't have before. And so they came up with this term MLTS, Multi-Line Telephone System. And so basically BAUM's Act and Kerry's Law, those were both two pieces of legislation that don't form the regulations. They direct the FCC to create the regulations. And so that's what the FCC did, was they used the term MLTS to kind of wrap all this up. Okay. And I don't know about you, Erwin, I'm super excited to see the results of this, because I'm still getting a lot of questions every day. It's been a year since the MLTS regulations deadline occurred. They broke it up into a few phases, but it's been just over a year since the deadline has come, and I still get questions about this. So I'm super excited to see what the results of this are.
Yeah, same here as well.
I'll push these out. And Robin, it sounds like you're not going to stop getting questions anytime soon, because looks like a good more than 2/3, almost 3/4 of our respondents either got a ways to go or just have no idea. So I'll throw it back to Robin and Erwin. You guys can take it from here.
I think this is a good segue to what we'll talk about. Not surprising at all that companies feel like they have a long way to go, or that they have no idea, because there is some lack of clarity in what it means to be compliant that we'll try and address as we go forward.
Yeah, and it is a complex problem to solve, and so this is I agree with Erwin completely. This is not surprising. I don't disagree with you at all. This is not surprising that you've got some people that have no idea. There's trying to figure it out, and then people that have a long ways to go. This is really good.
Excellent. So let's jump right into that topic. And I think, Robin, whenever we give this talk, we always like to say we're not attorneys. We're not going, we can't, we're not qualified to provide legal advice to your organization. You'll hear throughout the discussion that we recommend you do consult appropriate legal counsel to determine specific compliance risk within your organization. But we'll try and share with you the best practices from a design and go forward standpoint. So let's talk about the two laws, Carey's Law and BAUM's Act. Carey's Law was enacted back in, I think it was 2019 that it went in, or that it was passed and signed. But it became, the requirement went into effect as of February 16th, 2020 for new installs of MLTS, aka PBXs, aka phone systems. And what it requires is a couple of things. First off, that anytime somebody picks up a phone and presses the 3 digits 911 or dials it through a soft phone, that call is automatically sent to a 911 call center. There's no requirement for a prefix. They don't have to dial a 9 to get out, an 8 to get out, or so on. The second key component of Carey's Law is that it requires notification to appropriate on-site personnel. So if you're at your desk and you call 911, not only will that call go hopefully to the right operator with your accurate location information, but that it will also notify a security person or some appropriate person on location that a 911 call has been made, and where that, again, ideally where that call has come from, so that when the first responders show up at the door and they can't get in because, they need a pass key or whatever, that there's somebody at the door that can understand that call has been made and get them to the right spot. So that's kind of the first part that we'll talk about. The second is BAUM's Act. It's a long acronym that I'm not going to go into. It was named after a person in Oregon, I believe it was, who was very instrumental in early 911 regulations. And what BAUM's Act is kind of almost a complement, I would say, to Carey's Law, is that it requires that calls made to 911 are sent with a dispatchable location, with at least a minimal of a front door address, but potentially even additional information that can help first responders locate where that call came from. And the dates to note with BAUM's Act are twofold. First, as of January 6, 2021, for fixed line phone systems, those would have been your traditional phones that plug into a wall or hardwired. And then January 6th of last year, 2022, for non-fixed endpoints. So those could be soft phones, wireless phones, et cetera. BAUM, as we think about BAUM and Carey's Law, Robin, any additional comments that you have?
No, just that again, these were really good pieces of legislation that really work together to require a solid 911 solution to impact public safety. So if you go back several years, right, when somebody would make a 911 phone call from a large building, the only thing that was required was the front door address. Now, because of this, you have to deliver not only the front door address, but also room level, floor level, suite level information, something more granular that's obviously going to help in several different scenarios. And it has a powerful impact on public safety, not just from the delivery of the call itself, but also the ability to give the first responders the stuff they need, the information they need to appropriately respond. And or if the call becomes disconnected, right? That's where Carey's Law and some of the stuff comes into play, is if the call becomes disconnected, the ability to call back to the appropriate device that was calling 911. So this is a good thing. I think the one key thing here that's interesting to me is, back to the question about, or the comment about MLTS is that this is, typically in the past, the FCC has regulated carriers and so forth. This is really, I think it's their first time regulating this new term MLTS providers, new PBX providers, right? It's a new world. So that's why it's a complex problem to solve. A lot of you out there and a lot of like bandwidth customers aren't used to having to solve these problems, and they're not used to being regulated like this before. So this is good stuff to understand the why we do what we do.
Right. And if you look at the text of the law, especially with the BAUM Act, it requires the operator, the seller, the installer, all of those to ensure compliance. So there is no way to say, well, you know what, I'm just an enterprise, I don't have to worry about this because, well, I bought it, and I'm not the operator. You as an operator, you are required to be compliant.
Exactly.
So let's talk about the biggest challenge, in my opinion, of what we've seen is, what does it mean to be compliant? Again, if you look at the text of the law, it requires that systems that are deployed after the compliance date must be compliant. So what does that mean for older systems? And this is where, again, I'm going to come back to this. I think, Robin, you'll agree, is this is where you need to talk to your lawyers of what it's going to mean for you to be compliant for your own organization. There's not a hard and fast rule. So some of the organizations we work with, they look at anytime there might be a major upgrade to a system, meaning they've upgraded, say, an on-prem phone system to a new version of software, that would count as a new deployment, and therefore they must achieve compliance. I've seen other organizations that say, you know what, our phone system's 15 years old, or we don't need to worry about this. Not necessarily, in my opinion, the best approach. So we saw that on the poll that we did earlier, that roughly 2/3 either thought they were on the way to compliance or didn't have any idea. And we've seen this now in our research. This is a little bit of a sneak preview of some research that we're going to publish in about 2 weeks, where we went out to about 440 end user organizations, and we asked them a number of questions across a variety of different communication collaboration technologies. But digging into Carrier's Law and BAUM Act, we found only about 63% that said they thought they were compliant with both. About 11% said, you know what, we have an older phone system, we don't need to be compliant, which creates potentially some risk if you can't send a call to the right 911 operator. You can't provide that dispatchable location that Robin talked about. You can't notify security desk personnel, or you're still even requiring a prefix for somebody to get an outside line. Smaller segments that thought they were compliant with one or the other, and about 15% of our participants didn't even know if they were compliant. So what does that mean? And these are the questions that you need to think about, answer with, again, appropriate counsel, appropriate partners that you're using to provision, operate, manage those phone systems. What do you need to do about legacy systems? The dispatchable location, again, that definition, Robin mentioned, having that street address as a minimum, having additional information if it's available. But it's not going to be helpful to a first responder to come in and go, we have a 911 call that came from unit G7 or cubicle 238. They're not going to know that where that cubicle is located. So the person who's meeting them at the front door, the security or other appropriate on-site personnel, they're the ones that have to have that knowledge of where that call came from, and they can get 911 operators to the right location. And then there's also this issue of mobile devices. We'll talk a little bit more about it. Most 911 calls today happen on a person's cell phone. So if I'm at my desk and something happens, fire breaks out, and I pick up my cell phone outside of the enterprise communication environment, and I call 911, where will the operator know where that call is coming from? Will they have dispatchable location? And what responsibility exists for the enterprise, especially if that's a company-provided phone? These are all a lot of the legal issues that I think organizations need to work through. Robin, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that, a couple things to add is that we're kind of splitting hairs here a little bit, but not really. In that there are the BAUM Act and Carrier's Law laws. They do come together nicely for the MLTS regulations. But one thing I just want to mention is that the BAUM Act laws, there's just a part of BAUM Act that comes into the MLTS regulations. There's much more, and we're not going to get into all the details of BAUM Act, right? But there's just more things that BAUM Act applies to. We're going to focus definitely on the MLTS side of things today. for sure. And and to be compliant with that, right? I think it's really nice how the MLTS regulations incorporate aspects of both Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act to make things better, right? To make things better. To your point, right? You can put in an address line to some detailed information that is really only going to mean something that's on site. So making sure that that notification goes out to a security guard or to somebody who can meet the first responders at the first door to help them find that desk or that suite or that or get key card access up to the right floor to make things work. That's critical in how all this works together. It's interesting that I think it's interesting in all this that it's the FCC had to put something out there. Well, they didn't have to, but I think they've done an okay job of pretty good job of putting something out there. It's really hard to codify, right? Because you look from building to building, enterprise to enterprise, office to office. What's going to be an acceptable dispatchable location at one place is going to look completely different for a dispatchable location at another place. And so it's going to take time. Again, we're seeing some best practices emerge to make all this happen, and some best practices in terms of what type of address line to you do, what are some of the different things you can do to make this happen. But it's going to take time to get there. And actually, there's one of the questions is that we had in there was, are there any financial penalties for not being compliant on this, right? What's part of the MLTS regulations, right? Are there any financial penalties? And there are. The FCC has designated financial penalties for this. I don't remember what they are exactly off the top of my head. I haven't seen any yet. I haven't seen the FCC fine anybody yet. I don't know. Have you, Erwin?
No, I haven't. The penalty is $10,000 for a violation plus $500 a day until it's fixed. But you're right. No, I haven't seen that. But there have been a number of lawsuits. There are currently ones that are floating around, mostly more on the consumer side, where people made a 911 call that didn't go to the right location. Certainly, businesses are potentially opening themselves up to risk if a call is made, it's not going to the right operator, it's not going to the right location information. Not only that, but again, at the end of the day, I'm going to give a hat tip to Mark Fletcher, who provided a comment. It's all about maintaining a safe working environment. That ensuring employee safety is paramount. Whether that's employees, contractors, visitors, guests, etc. That if there is, God forbid, an emergency, that they can call 911 knowing that call is going to go to the right location and that the responders are going to know where to go.
And I stole a question from Jerry there, and he just posted another one, which I think this is good. We can make this interactive. Thanks for all the questions, everyone. In some states, there are MLTS 911 requirements in place, which takes precedence. Right. So you've got, and that's absolutely right. That there have been some states where they've implemented, they've tried to better clarify some of these regulations and say, okay, what does a dispatchable location, what square footage does it tie down to? Some states have gone down to that level, right?
Even some cities as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And some cities as well. Again, this is where I've got to say, I'm gonna parrot what Erwin said a little bit earlier. I'm not a lawyer, can't give legal advice. My lawyers would start to scream if I did. So in terms of which takes precedence, consult with make sure. My recommendation is make sure you're aware of your environment you're working in, or the multiple states and multiple environments you're working within. Make sure you understand what those state or local regulations would be, in addition to the federal regulations from the FCC, and consult your lawyer and understand what is going to take precedence.
Definitely. So I know we can go into this in a lot more detail, but we're going to move on. Yeah. So I think we have another poll coming up, Eric.
Yes, we do. Where are your communications located? Are you currently still on-prem? Are you hybrid premises and cloud, or are you purely cloud-based right now? So take a couple minutes, give you a chance to answer those. And I wanted to pick up just on one thing. We're going to talk mostly about the technology today, but I think the point that I think both of you raised kind of about the someone meeting the the first responders at the door, that there's concurrently with the technology decisions you're making, there's a training element of this. There's a making sure not only your end users, but your security people and others are also aware of what they have to do. Is that fair?
Definitely. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go on, but not only that, but making sure that you're working with local first responders so you know what they need, being able to run through tests, to being able to communicate with them effectively, to say that, if there is an emergency and they have to come out to your location, what are they looking for? What kinds of information can you provide to them? Who can be there? There was Jerry that raised that point. What if there's no one at the office? If you're working at a location, as many of us may do, where there's no person at that front door who can allow somebody in without a passkey. What is the scenario there? Whether that's having a Knox box type device sitting outside, or providing some way that first responders can bypass that building security. Any
All right. Well,
any other comments? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Robin.
All right.
Do that.
Yeah, how are we looking on the poll?
I'll go ahead and push it out so that we can keep moving here. And it looks like you can see what our results are. A little over half are hybrid.
Yeah. So again, this isn't too surprising, at least to me, that we've got a lot of people still in that hybrid land where they're operating some bit of on-premise and some pushing into the cloud and so forth. And then you've got I think what might be a little surprising, I don't know if it's too surprising, is that the pure cloud number has finally surpassed the on-premise number. So yeah, we've got pure cloud at 23%, on-premise at 19.7%. So by a pretty good margin, well, not huge, super huge margin, but at least now that's what I'm seeing, at least in the marketplace, is a lot of people are moving towards the cloud with this. And I think the hybrid, I think over time, we're going to see this where hybrid is going to be lower and lower, and then the cloud's just going to increase over time.
Yeah, this is really similar to the research I mentioned that we're about to publish. On-prem is still there. It's still an important part, but the majority of companies, especially in a larger enterprise, have a mix of communication solutions. So they may have some that are cloud provided, some that are on-prem. They may have meeting rooms that have the ability to dial out, that are considered telephony endpoints, but they might be connecting to a cloud meeting service. So yeah, I think this will tie into a lot of what we're going to talk about, which is there isn't, how do you address the having a consistent 911 capability when you might have a variety of different communication platforms deployed?
Perfect.
All right. So how do we get there? Let's talk about the first slide here. Robin, you want to take a stab at starting with this, and then I can jump in?
Yeah. Let me jump in here and please add color as we go along here. But I always like to look at this problem in kind of a 3-layer cake, or in 3 layers. We talk about the application layer, this middle routing layer, and the network layer, which is represented by this diagram on the right-hand side. And we're going to start by talking about the middle layer, or this routing layer, and your communication stack, because that's where your communication stack needs to integrate in with some sort of routing function to be able to route calls to one of the nearly 6,000 PSAPs, or public safety answering points, or emergency call centers, whatever flavor you want to call it these days, that are out there. And so that's one of the things you need to be looking for, is the ability to connect your communication stack, whether it's on-premise or cloud communications or a mix. You're going to want to connect that communication stack to a routing provider, a routing layer, if you will, that can do that, right? So whether you're using a Cisco or an Avaya or a Mitel or Microsoft Teams or RingCentral, Zoom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of different systems out there, and it can take some time to make that integration work. And so, I anticipate bandwidth we'll keep busy here for several more months, if not years, as we migrate people over to on these systems. And then as you migrate from on-premise to cloud, it may require some adjustments and some tweaking to that system to be able to either become compliant or stay compliant based on what's going on. But that's one of the key things here is connecting into a routing layer that has that ability to interface and understand your communication stack and be able to route that. And I would love to tell you there is a kind of a one size fits all solution. Unfortunately, my experience has been is that Teams, like for example, Microsoft Teams does things differently enough compared to Cisco, for example, like a Cisco Unified Call Manager or a BroadWorks platform, a Cisco BroadWorks platform, that you've got to have different aspects and almost different solutions, different interfaces to be able to make those solutions work. You've got to be able to have, you got to have custom built, well, not custom built, but you got to have tailored solutions for your communication stack itself. So as we see, as I see customers that have hybrid solutions, so maybe they've historically run a Cisco system and they might have an Avaya as well, and maybe they use somebody else for call center, and then they're migrating to Teams, but not everything to Teams, right? So they need to solve across all of those different solutions, right? You got to consider that, right? And all of those solutions, everything I just mentioned has all been updated, right? If you're running on, the chances are that you're running an updated solution that falls under these regulations, right? Unless you're running maybe an old Nortel system that hasn't been touched in 3 or 4 years, you fall under these regulations, right? You are an MLTS operator. If you operate a newer Cisco system, and you've just put some new phones in, if you just deployed Microsoft Teams with phone, any of their flavors of phone system, right? Whether it's Teams calling plans or Direct Connect or Operator Connect and all those different flavors, right? Any of those, you are now a MLTS operator, and you need to adhere to these regulations. So that's the bottom line here. Is I don't think one size fits all. But I don't know. What do you think, Erwin? Do you agree?
No, I agree. And especially if we go back to, we talked about hybrid and having multiple different platforms, being in a transition from on-prem to cloud. And then also understanding what the capabilities are of the platforms that you're working with. So we see, some providers have still very manual upgrade processes. Others are able to support things like more of the next generation 911 type flavor of being able to automatically detect where a phone is and update that location in real time, especially for people who might be nomadic. We had a question come in about how do you support nomadic users. So it's understanding the capabilities of the different providers, and then also ensuring that your own move, add, change, provisioning is integrated with your 911 management approach, so that you're able to track locations as they change, especially for, in our study now, we're finding roughly 40% of employees are hybrid. They're splitting time between office and work. About half of the workspace is being converted to hot desking. So maybe I come in and I reserve a space and my phone is configured. I want to make sure that if the phone on that desk is now configured for me, that my location information is accurate. So if I have to use that phone to make a 911 call, that it knows where I am.
Yeah, and I'll add, just to expand on that one more second, is that the regulations came out just as the pandemic was hitting, and so the regulations didn't contemplate that what we lovingly refer to now as the work from home problem, right? That hybrid workforce problem. So hybrid can mean a lot of different things. Hybrid can mean I'm using hybrid systems. It can also mean I've got end users that are working from home one day, but now working in the office the next day, or they may be at a Starbucks or whatever. 2 years ago, as this was really emerging, work from home became critical because everybody picked up their phones and went home, right? And so anyway, these are all the things you've got to consider as you implement this to be fully compliant.
So let's talk about some of the solutions that are out there to assist with some of these challenges. And so there are a number of third-party solutions. We'll talk about bandwidth in a little bit. And this is where you can overlay potentially a platform on top of the different phone system services you have. You can take advantage of things like auto detection of changes and auto detection of location. And we'll even allow you to support things like soft phones and mobile devices. And in a lot of cases, these solutions also provide 911 call routing. So if there is a scenario where the system can't figure out where that call is coming from, that call can then go to a call center where the call center person can hopefully identify where that call is coming from and then route it to the appropriate local PSAP. They can provide some additional feature functionality, things like call recording if companies want to understand what happened in a 911 call. We talked about soft phones. Missed dial prevention is a big challenge where if you do require 9 to get an outside line, somebody has dialed 9 and then they accidentally double dial 9 and they dial 1 for a long distance number, or they dial 9 and they double dial 1. Now they've already made that 911 call. So having missed dial prevention is another factor that may or may not be available from your calling platform. And then that interface to provide notifications to security personnel, to incident and event management systems. Those are all additional features that you might want to look at from a third-party provider. And we find today, in our study, almost half of participants simply rely on the tools that are given to them by their phone provider. And that may work, especially for smaller companies. But in this environment where you've got a mix of different platforms, you've got people working from different locations, you have some of the needs for some of the other features we talked about. You may want to look at using a third-party management platform, using services available from a SIP trunking provider, or from a managed service provider that can bring some of these factors to bear. Robin, your thoughts on where third-party solutions fit?
Yeah, in fact, I want to tie in a very nice question that's very timely. There's a question that was asked, which is some of the newest Wi-Fi, the next generation or latest generation Wi-Fi systems and wireless VoIP systems incorporate location information for E911 and distributing location services, and so on and so forth. The question was, can you comment on how these mesh with this subject? And I'll say, first and foremost, the regulations say what needs to be done, right? The regulations basically say that a dispatchable location needs to be delivered to the PSAP when a call is made from an MLTS system, and for both fixed and now non-fixed and fixed endpoints. So if you've got a non-fixed endpoint, like a laptop that's roaming around to Wi-Fi access points and so on and so forth, how that information gets transmitted and resolved to a dispatchable location is not what the FCC is specifying. The FCC is specifying just what needs to happen, that a dispatchable location needs to be delivered. So what that means is that you've got some flexibility. And to Erwin's point, a lot of these switch manufacturers and infrastructure manufacturers are considering this, and they're doing a great job of building in how to resolve location information based on Wi-Fi access point information. How do you resolve that to a dispatchable location and pass that through a company like Bandwidth into this 911 routing network so that we can get it to the right PSAP? There's a lot of different options on how to do that. So the good news here is I think the FCC did a great job of just dictating what needs to happen, not how, and it's leaving it up to the market to determine what are some of the best ways to do this. And we're seeing some best practices emerge for how to do this, for like I like to delineate it between on-net and off-net. When you're on-net, you can do certain things a lot easier, but when you're off-net, like you're at a Starbucks, all right, what's the best way to do things there? And I think we'll get into that in more detail here in a little bit. But I think that's one of the key things behind this is some of these third parties are doing better jobs. So when you look at the full stack solution for this, you're going to need somebody like a Bandwidth, but you might also need some features and capabilities built into these Wi-Fi access points to be able to resolve that location information down to a dispatchable location.
Definitely. All right, Eric, I think we have another poll.
All right. The question now is, if you're using on-prem communications, what are you using? Avaya, Cisco, Mitel, Broadworks, multiple systems, or something else? So while we let everybody answer that, I'll turn it to Robin and Erwin in terms of thinking about that Wi-Fi question. Have we seen tested anywhere? Kind of, what does and doesn't fit the bill? I mean, to your point, Robin, talking about what the law saying what you have to do, not how you have to do it, but specifically with a facility where the person may be all over the campus or all over the building at different times. Have we seen any kind of a test or challenge or case even where there was some ambiguity about where the person was because the network couldn't solve it, or a case where somebody thinks they have kind of got a solution for this?
One of the stories I'll tell, and then Erwin, please chime in. But one of the best stories I've heard around this is when there's a large, enterprise organization that had a very large building, and they were worried about the exact question you're asking in terms of what is good enough. What does that dispatchable location look like good enough? And so what they did was they reached out to their local public safety. They did some testing. And very intentionally cycled through with their local PSAP and said, we want to partner with you and work through and get this right and go through that process. Now, I realize not everybody has the wherewithal to do something like that, but I thought that was a great story that they did a bunch of testing to figure out, all right, how detailed do we need to get? Where, is northeast corner of the third floor good enough for the first responders? Or is it something more detailed, and it kind of varied depending on the situation too. So that's another thing I'd point out. And I think we have that at the very end of the presentation in terms of one of our checklist items is, if you can, coordinate with your first responders in your local agency to see what helps.
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. I mean, a lot of it depends on the device and what the device manufacturer supports. In a lot of cases, people might be using either company provided or personal mobile devices. So if they make a 911 call from that, it doesn't go over the company calling platform. It would likely go, it will go out across the cell network, and that creates a lot of challenges in terms of the call is going to go to the cell tower that has the strongest signal, and will that cell tower be able to or will that phone be able to triangulate and provide and understand its location? There's a number of FCC efforts underway to sort of standardize how wireless location management is handled. So don't want to get too sidetracked into that. And I think, the challenge also is that we're starting to see now in the enterprise space is there's been a renewed interest in fixed mobile convergence. So you're seeing solutions now like Microsoft Teams Mobile, and Cisco has something called WebEx Go, which allows essentially iPhone, Android type devices to function as an extension on the enterprise network. And so the 911, how those will support 911 location tracking, reporting, how those 911 calls will be handled, I think is something that's going to create yet another wrinkle for people that are trying to figure out a 911 strategy for those mobile devices.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and push out the results. So you can see results here, probably about what we might have expected. I'll turn it over to Erwin and Robin again.
Yeah, again, lots of legacy infrastructure, or even a lot of, like we talked about earlier in the hybrid approach, that I think it was about half of our audience is hybrid. So they may be using this plus a cloud service from a number of the different providers that Robin mentioned earlier.
Yeah, my guess would be that in that other is a lot of Teams, would be my guess, just because I've seen a lot of Microsoft Teams crop up these days. Yeah, this is interesting on premise. And then obviously I assume this applies to not just the 23 or whatever, 19%, whatever it was that applied to on-prem, but also the hybrid, right? You're using one of these systems as well as the purely on-prem folks. So thank you for this information. This is interesting. Yeah, maybe we should have added Teams in there. I don't know. Anyway, good stuff.
Skype for Business would be the on-prem.
Skype for Business. Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I think that's probably still a lot of that out there.
I still ran across that yesterday. Yeah.
Excellent. So let's talk about 911 network solutions and how they play. Robin, I'll turn this one over to you.
Yeah. So back in the context of this 3-layer solution here, the application layer, the routing layer, and the network solution layer. The network solution is one of those key layers that you've got to have that ties in tightly to some degree with that routing layer. And this is the foundation, right? This is, I call it the 911 access layer. This is where you have the ability to reach out and deliver a 911 call to any of the nearly 6,000 PSAPs across the country natively, right? So a 911 call, right, is a special call, right? It's not your average telephone call, right? The very first leg of the 911 call, traverses just a part of some sort of regular phone system, But as soon as an industry, we look to get that call as soon as we can into dedicated 911 infrastructure so that we can get that call to the local 911 network, which is going to work in a dedicated way to get that call on dedicated links to the PSAP. And then with that call, we're going to be able to deliver additional information, including location information, stuff, that's commonly referred to as class of service, stuff like that. You'll hear us 911 geeks refer to it as ALI, automatic location information, this ALI record that's been around for forever. But it's changing as we get into next gen, but that's a whole nother story, not for this webinar. Basically it becomes, once it enters a 911 network, any aspect of 911 network, and that's one of the things bandwidth does, right? We have our customers ingress into a specific 911 infrastructure that we keep separate from our voice infrastructure for this very reason, so that we can, as quick as possible, turn it into an actual 911 call. And we want to be able to route that 911 call directly into a 911 call center. So for those of you that don't know what we're talking about, or haven't explored this yet, this is one of the key things you want to look for as you solve for this solution. Is you want to look for one of the providers out there that has a nationwide 911 access network. And there's only a few of us out there that can do it nationwide. Now, if you're going to be limited to a particular area, you can focus on your local phone company and stuff like that, but that can present some challenges in of itself. I think that the nascent or the emerging recommendation is, focus on one of the providers that can do a nationwide 911 access network, because it's going to follow the standardized protocols that we've established for this type of solution.
And a lot of the companies we talk to are still using local loops for 911. So if I've got a remote office in Topeka, Kansas, as an example, I may still have a POTS line, plain old telephone service line. And when a 911 call is made, I've got a gateway that intercepts it, sends it off to the local operator. But at the same time, the carriers are retiring those POTS lines. They're jacking up the prices of them. And we're seeing organizations looking at ways that they can potentially save money by moving everything over to SIP. So if they can work with a national provider that can take those calls, route them to the right PSAP over an IP connection, there's, again, additional opportunity to save money.
Yeah, exactly. And then the challenge there is if you hook you've got an old on-premise Cisco, not old, I don't mean it that way, but a Cisco's UCM on-premise system, you got it hooked up to the local exchange, but then you've got this hybrid workforce that works from home or takes their phone device and moves to the next state over, right? When you get in that scenario,
questions about that. So.
Yeah. When you get in that scenario, what's the requirement? What are you supposed to do? Well, in that environment, you're supposed to route the call to the appropriate PSAP, which is like you're in Kansas, you make that, everything's tied there, but then you come out to Denver, Colorado. If I make a call from Denver, Colorado on my soft phone back through my Cisco system, that phone call needs to make it to the Denver PSAP, right? It's got to go to that Denver PSAP. So that's where I say having a nationwide 911 access network can be critical, especially in these days of the nomadic or remote worker.
Yeah, definitely. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. So let's go. I think we have another poll coming up.
All right. Yeah, this is our last poll. How much of your workforce do you need to solve for remote work or work from home? So how much of your workforce is remote, is work from home? Is it 100% or 2/3, half, 1/3, or none? And so again, we'll give you just a couple minutes here to answer that question. And maybe since we're really getting a lot of questions and getting on in the hour, I'll throw one of them out here now. This person asks, when my current location is not in an on-net office, notification would go to office security. That is confusing and not helpful to office security. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I can jump in real quick, and then Rob, if you want to follow up.
Sure.
So we see this scenario all the time. Again, as we talked about hybrid work, and I think, pretty large percentage, I imagine, are spending time outside of their office. So typically what organizations will do is configure their remote clients to be able to detect, and again, this is usually provided by the apps themselves, to be able to detect that they're outside the office if they have a associated desktop phone, which we still find 20% or so of companies that make those available to remote workers who want them, that they will be able to detect where they are. And then as far as the notification part, yeah, you may still want to have a notification sent to appropriate person within your organization that's identified as a risk management officer to know that an 911 call was made from at home. So you use the scenario that I'm working from home, I've got a phone on my desk, it's a company phone, I have a health issue, and someone walks in and finds me. They should be able to pick up that phone, dial 911, and that call is going to need to go to the PSAP closest to where I am at home, and not be routed across the company network and sent, to somewhere close to where the company is located. So that's again a pretty common scenario. What we also find is, again, not giving legal advice, but what I've seen as best practices is that communicating with employees to help them understand what's known, or what the services are supported. So if you are operating a legacy system and you cannot accurately guarantee that a 911 call is going to go to the right PSAP, that employees are notified that they have to sign something that says that they've reviewed and they understand that 911 calls will not be made. But again, if you have a phone sitting on that person's desk at home, again, not providing legal advice, but I think there's going to be an implicit assumption that call should be able to dial 911.
Yeah, and I'll say, I think this whole remote work or work from home situation is going to create all kinds of new case law, all kinds of new legal issues. And again, not a lawyer, can't give legal advice, not only just 911, but it's going to create all kinds of legal issues for workers' comp and all kinds of things. But to get back to the heart of the question is because it can be confusing, right? I think it's confusing all around. But I would agree with what Erwin said. I mean, when you get in that situation where you're working from home, send that notification to whoever can use it, right? Obviously, your security guard at the front desk at the main office building can't use it, but maybe HR or risk assessment or somebody like that can use it. So that's the idea. Again, the MLTS regulations say that you send the notification to a designated entity, which a lot of creativity there to work with.
Okay. All right. Here are our results, and turn it over to Erwin and Robin.
So definitely a lot of people working outside the office on some sort of part-time basis, and addressing some of the issues we talked about. So Robin, why don't we have you share some details around how we can leverage software for dealing with some of these issues?
Yeah. So the top layer of this, and then I'll try and wrap this up pretty quickly so we can get to some more of these questions. The top layer of this is the application layer, where building on top of the routing layer and the network layer, there's application level solutions to be able to solve some of these location issues, to track location for on-net versus off-net, to maybe do a better job of notifications, to tie into different notification platforms and so forth, on how that's going to work. And so first and foremost, I just want to be clear, what Bandwidth does, right, is we provide a routing layer and a network layer. That's what we do well. I think we can support some application layers, but again, depending on the platform, going back to the very beginning of the webinar, depending on the platform being used, you may require different applications. For example, on one end of the spectrum, I'll just throw it that way for now. People are probably not going to agree with this, but that's okay. There's Microsoft Teams, right? Where Microsoft Teams has done an integration, and they've built out a lot of integrated applications for managing location, both on net and off net and so forth. And they've built that in. And so they don't need a lot of additional applications on top of a routing layer and a network layer, right? They can take advantage of that. Some of the other systems don't have that. And that's where, in the case of Bandwidth, we've partnered with several different providers, three partners specifically, to help solve for some of these different application problems that we've seen out there in the marketplace. So we think we've brought to bear here a best of breed solution across some of the different platforms and some of the different use cases that are required out there. Again, getting back to that, I have a hard time saying there's a one size fits all solution. There's a lot of different solutions out there that makes. So if we want to go to the next slide, three of our partners are 9Line, 911 Secure, and 911 Inform, and I'll just call some of this out specifically. We didn't have anybody comment on the Broadworks platform, right? Or nobody was willing to chime in and say they're using the BroadWorks platform. But that's one of the reasons BroadWorks, and under the auspices of Cisco, right, have implemented some very specific protocols and so forth in the last year and a half, 2 years. And so, that required some application layer help. And that's where we partner with Nineline pretty exclusively on the BroadWorks platform. But then if you've got like a Syskin and Avaya platform, we've got a partner 911 Inform that can work well there to provide a pretty nice application, a very slick application for location management for Cisco and Avaya and some others, as well as a really good notification technique, right? And so that's really the gist of it. And they're all I don't want to say they're all one's better than the other. I my lawyers would tell me I have to say that, but I also want to say that there's just differences here. There's differences in how different customers want to solve different problems, and the platforms they're using. And so that's the good news, getting back to the how and the what, right? The what is, or that the what is, we all got to solve this problem somehow. The how is, there's options. You've got options out there. And so I'd be happy to talk with you guys. I mean, all these three providers have built fantastic solutions on top of our routing and 911 access networks. And there's some great solutions there to talk with you about. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
Excellent. So I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to kind of go through this real quick. This is all the additional, kind of recapping some of what we talked about and adding some additional challenges and areas that you want to make sure you address. So the chart on the right is also from our study. It shows you what features people are using from their 911 management solutions. Again, if those are third party or what's available to them from the different providers. So you can see there's a lot of other areas to think about. And if you think about a checklist of what do you want to accomplish, we covered most of this early on. Make sure you're talking to your first responders, you're addressing the needs of nomadic, mobile, hybrid workers, you're properly relaying notifications to the right people. As Robin mentioned, it may not always be the security guard at the front desk. Taking advantage of next generation 911 capabilities to allow devices and endpoints to figure out where they are without somebody having to go in and enter an address into a screen. We talked about remote workers, addressing some of the issues related to potentially contact center employees who may be able to dial out but may not have a dedicated DID assigned to them. That's some of the solutions that Robin mentioned on the previous slide. Making sure that you have consistency of workplace safety across all locations for all people who may be in there, not just employees, but contractors, guests, and so on. And then making sure that you're informing people when there are gaps or concerns or what limitations might exist. We talked about that scenario of somebody at home who, you may not be able to support a 911 call from their soft phone running on their desktop when they're outside the office, but you want to make sure that people know that, or they get a pop-up that says, hey, we can't handle this 911 call because you're not in the right location. So as you're mitigating some of the gaps in communications, it's really critical. So Robin, probably makes sense to move right into Q&A for the last few questions. So do you have anything else to add?
No, I'll just say, I think one of the things here is a couple of things relative to this list that I'm seeing a lot these days are the remote, and it kind of ties into one of our questions, which is the remote work from home solution there. What I'm seeing is the emerging best practice is to allow the end user to provision their 911 address, right? And so a lot of platforms are doing that. Microsoft Teams does that. I keep saying that, but everybody's doing it, right? Everybody's providing some sort of feature functionality to allow that to happen, which ties into the last bullet point is make sure you inform your employees that they've got to do that. Again, this all falls under the how, right? The how of how this needs to happen. And the other one is address workers who don't have a dedicated phone number, right? That's another thing I keep hearing a lot these days is, or workers that have multiple phone devices. There's some complex use cases to consider as you've got one phone number tied to my soft phone. I've got a soft phone on my iPhone, and then and it's all tied to my desk phone at the office, which I'm only at once a month or something like that, right? How does all that work? How do you dial 911 from any of those devices and make that work throughout the thing? Those are the things to consider. You've got to consider as you employ this. So yeah, I think this is a great checklist, and now we can jump into some of these questions.
Yeah, definitely could have gone another hour, and we invite everybody to join us at Enterprise Connect on Monday morning for our 911 session again this year. So again, I think this kind of recaps everything we talked about at this point. So it probably makes sense, Eric, to bring you in and use the last few minutes for Q&A.
Sure. We had a couple questions about the requirement or the potential for users having to update the system themselves when they move around, or having to notify the system of where they are. And one of the questions is there a way to automate these sort of updates, or what's the best way to scale a requirement like that?
Yes, I think there's there's a lot of complexity behind that question, because there's a lot of different ways to take that. And I'm seeing a lot of different people solve that in a lot of different ways. For example, the requirement is to have a dispatchable location for this phone device when you're working from home, laptop, right? Well, the question then is prompted: Do I allow that phone device to register to my system before? Do I activate that phone before I have an actual valid 911 address, right? Or do you force them to enter in and validate a 911 address before they can actually use it, right? So there's pluses and minuses to that, but those are some of the things that some of these systems are taking into account and trying to figure out. That's just one of the really crazy complications. And again, I can't answer that for you. You need to consult your lawyer and understand your policies and understand your company's and employees, and how are they going to use the system, and what makes sense for you, right? Again, the laws, the requirements, the regulations and requirements are pretty straightforward. This is what has to happen, not how it has to happen. Do you do that, or do you give them 5 chances to enter in a home address before you say, okay, I'm done asking, you can go ahead and register your phone, and we'll go ahead and turn it on? Because there are some backup natures to this, right? There are some backup scenarios to this where if you don't have a phone or a dispatchable location registered to that phone, there are nationwide call centers to send that call to, so that the call doesn't get dropped. At least it can get processed. But that adds time into the call, and it's not ideal. So it's a very complex situation that requires some very thoughtful consideration, especially with your legal counsel, to figure out what's going to be right for you.
And then also, I think just to look at the capabilities of your phone system provider, some have the ability to, detect that, hey, a phone is now registered on a different IP address to a different MAC address on a wireless or wired LAN, and I want to prompt the user to update their address, or I want to pull a location information server that can then report back to that phone where it's located now, and then automatically update the information. So whether that's through native capabilities from your calling provider or through third-party solutions, those are different features you want to look at to address that issue.
So on behalf of our guests, I'm Eric Kraft. Thanks for your time, and have a great day.